Okay, welcome to everyone on Facebook. Looks like we're live there now. We're going to wait just a couple minutes, right until it hits 11, and then we'll get started. And Happy New Year as well. I keep forgetting. Oh man. Welcome to everyone joining us. We have a few more people joining our Zoom meeting here, so we'll get started in just a minute or two. Okay, all right, that looks like it's 11 a.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Allison and I'm part of the education department at the Timken. I'm excited to welcome you to our last tour of 2020. We will keep doing these tours in the new year, but this is our last one of 2020. So just a couple of guidelines before we begin. We ask that you keep yourselves muted for the duration of the tour, just so that we can hear our docents well and there's no interrupting or talking over each other. So you can go ahead and keep yourself muted. And then also, if you have any questions, we do welcome questions. We just ask that you put them in the chat box. So that's that speech bubble that can be found at the bottom of your screen. There's sort of a row of icons if you're on Zoom. You can put your questions in that chat box and we'll get to them at the end. And then if you're on Facebook, you can put your questions in the chat there in the comments section, and we'll be monitoring that too, so we can get to your questions at the end. So with that, I'd like to introduce our two docents for the tour today. So we have Barb Morgan, who you may have seen on some other tours of ours, and a new docent, Jerry Veal, who will be joining her. So I'm going to turn it over to them for our tour today. Thanks.
Well, also Happy New Year to all of you. To reiterate Allison's greeting, as we're about to embark on hopefully a positive new year. Jerry and I are here to present some of the highlights of our Jewel of Balboa Park, the Timken Museum. Many of you have been here live, and if you haven't, here is this lovely picture we have of our main door that is the entrance to the museum. You may notice that it's a postmodern building that was birthed in the 50s, 1950s, and came to fruition about 1965. It is the only building in Balboa Park that is not of the Spanish decor. This one stands out because of this architecture. The impetus for this museum began with the foundation called the Timken Foundation, or the Putnam Foundation. The Putnam Foundation originated with Putnam sisters who came to San Diego in the early 1900s from the East Coast. And they, and Jerry will add to this momentarily, had an interest in art. That interest in art led to the formation of a foundation. And the foundation, as I already said, led to the impetus to this building. The architect is Frank Hope, who was a famous architect here in San Diego. And then the financier is a gentleman, or was a gentleman, named Henry Timken. And with that background, and again, a reiteration of a Happy New Year to all of you, I would like to, before I turn it over to Jerry, I'll move to this book that I found in our own bookstore of the Timken. The name of the book, as you can see, is called The Intelligent Eye, Learning to Think by Looking at Art. And it piqued my interest because of that subtitle, Learning to Think by Looking at Art. Certainly, we're taught as school children to always think. We think in all of our subjects, and sometimes art is forgotten, and yet art is such an impetus also. In this opening to his book, and I'm going to quote a few lines from Mr. Perkins, he says, "Art is not just supposed to be beautiful, appropriate for a setting, or easy. Its most satisfying function is that it allows us to exercise our minds. An artwork will establish certain boundaries by its subject matter, its style, its materials, and its techniques. But it then lets us observe and analyze these givens by asking us to continue to probe and muse the paintings. And with that, Jerry will tell us how."
Thank you, Barbara. And welcome visitors and welcome to the Timken Museum. As you can see by the map of the museum, we have 6 galleries, 3 on either side of the beautiful rotunda. When the museum opens later this year, I hope that you, as you walk through the rotunda, you take the time to look at the tapestries that are hanging in the rotunda that were designed in the 16th century and prepared in the 17th century under the order of King Henry IV. They are really, truly beautiful and very, very detailed. And now we're going to walk through the Italian Spanish gallery into the Russian gallery. As Barbara mentioned, the collection's founding family included 2 sisters, Anne and Amy Putnam. Amy was very interested in Russian art and actually attended Stanford University as a graduate student to study Russian. Having done that, she established many, many contacts in the Russian art world. And in 1917, when the Bolshevik Revolution happened, she was able to use those contacts to make sure she knew what was happening to the art. The Bolshevik Revolution ended with a government that was not conducive to religion, but it did need money. And that caused them to go through all the churches and cathedrals and take many, many, many of the artworks and sell them on the marketplace to raise money for that revolution. At that point in time, the Western world was at the height of, toward the end of the Industrial Revolution, had lots of money. There was a new middle class and a new upper middle class that had come to the fore, and they were interested in acquiring art to show their appreciation for the finer things and to exemplify their ability to buy them, show their wealth. So icons became of great interest in the art world. Since Amy and Anne already had their contacts put together, they were able to amass one of the largest collection of Russian icons around. The Timken is fortunate to have over 400 of these icons in its collection. Now, as you enter the Russian gallery, be aware that the gallery is set up like a Russian chapel or a church, the east wall being the front of that church. And here in the Russian gallery, as you enter to the left, that is the east wall. Now, you will see that this is set up to resemble an iconostas, which is a gate or a fence or even a curtain in the chapel that separates the day-to-day world from the heavenly realm. And in this particular gallery, this left wall represents that iconostas. Across the top of the wall is a prayer row or a diesis chin. In the center is the Jesus Christ, here known as the Savior enthroned. To his right, our left, is the Virgin Mary, his mother, the Archangel Michael, and St. Peter. To Jesus's left, our right, is St. John the Baptist and the Archangel Gabriel and St. Paul. Now, below the prayer order is a pair of royal gates. These gates would be in any iconostas, different of course, but the gates that we have here and the prayer row above were all done in the 15th century in the Novgorod school. And the prayer gates shown here are the gates through which the priests, the deacons, and the bishops would leave the day-to-day world and enter the heavenly realm to celebrate the Mass or the feast that was being celebrated that day. This particular pair of royal gates has the Annunciation at the top row, and then Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John shown in the screens below. Now, as I mentioned, we have over 400 icons in the Timken collection. Many of them are shown on the walls of this gallery, and they are all truly exceptional. In the interest of time, today I'm only going to talk about one of the icons that we have. However, it is one of the more rare. In this particular picture, you can see it on the left standing on a block of marble. Most icons are painted on wood panel with tempera, which is egg yolk and water with some minerals mixed in to create the color. This icon, however, was painted on linen, and there are very few remaining in existence. This in particular happens to be a double-sided icon, which shows two strong parables of the Catholic tradition, the Christian tradition. The first parable is the 40 Martyrs of Sebaste. And Barbara, if you'd like to go to that slide, there we go. You can see the level of detail in this icon is incredible. Each martyr has a different hairstyle, a different facial expression, but the story of the 40 Martyrs of Sebaste is that this is a company of soldiers under the Eastern Roman Emperor of the time, Licinius, who is a pagan. This particular company of soldiers are all Christian, and Licinius decides he doesn't like that. He calls them into his presence and demands that they renounce their faith. They all, to a man, refuse to do so. He has them thrown into a freezing lake, and there they must stay until they recant their religion. They continue to refuse to do so. Licinius has a warm bathhouse built on the shore of the lake to tempt them away. One of their member, unfortunately, is in fact tempted, and you can see here he is entering the bathhouse. That's a big mistake because he is struck dead upon his entering that bathhouse. As the soldiers that are guarding this company are watching, one of the soldiers is so impressed by their dedication, their devotion to God, that he admits that he is a Christian also, disrobes and joins them in the lake, returning the number to 40. Throughout that night, God, who is seen here at the top center of the icon, encourages them and thanks them for their bravery and their devotion. You'll notice there are some items floating in the sky above them. Those are 40 crowns that signify that they are honored martyrs. Now, in the morning, when Licinius sees that none of them have died, unfortunately, he has them all killed and dismembered and their bodies strewn willy-nilly in the lake, supposedly never to be found. However, during that evening, God speaks to a bishop in the area who asks the bishop to take the faithful, gather the bones, and bury them in hallowed ground. And when the bishop and the townspeople go out to do that, they find that the bones are glowing and are easily found. And they therefore gather them up and bury them in the ground, setting the 40 martyrs at ease and at home. An interesting story demonstrating that devotion and sticking with your faith is the strongest thing that is expected in the Christian religion. Now, the other parable that's on the reverse side of this is the 4 men in the fiery furnace. This is a parable found in the book of Daniel, and this is the story of our friends Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, who are men that are studying in the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Now, they are Christian, and Nebuchadnezzar has a pagan kingdom. He builds a huge statue to himself and requires that everybody worship himself in that statue. As you can see at the back of right of this icon, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego refuse to do so, and he throws them into this fiery furnace, which supposedly is 7 times hotter than normal. And they still stand there and are still praying. And Nebuchadnezzar can't understand this. As he watches them, he realizes that there aren't just 3 men in the furnace, there are 4. That 4th man, of course, is an angel protecting the 3 from those awful flames. And in fact, as you can see at the base of this icon, 3 of the soldiers guarding the furnace are killed by the fires, not the men inside the fire. So these are beautiful icons. These icons would have traveled. That's why they're on linen. They would have been easy to carry. They could have been taken to different church areas and shown on their various feast days, which, as I mentioned, were March 9th, and this feast day is December 17th, to assist the faithful in understanding the story and help them concentrate and meditate on the meaning of that story. Now we're going to move to the Italian and Spanish gallery, where Barbara is going to take over. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you, Jerry. This is a painting by a Spanish painter. As a prelude to getting into this, I would like to mention or review for some of you that in this gallery, in the holdings of the Timken Museum, we do possess more paintings that are Italian than Spanish. The Italian gallery, as it has been set up, spans the time from the very, very late 1200s to around the early 1600s. So that's quite a bit of history. The late 1200s, early 1300s is the very end of the Middle Ages. And after that, we embarked on the Renaissance. And the Renaissance spanned about 150 years. And those years are often referred to as the beginning, the middle, and the end of the Renaissance to depict those different years. Following that, the bigger period is the Baroque period. And that's what this painting, which is done by the Spanish artist here, Zurbarán, Francisco de Zurbarán, depicts. Now, Baroque, for those of you who will review it with us, was a period that came about as a result, and it was painted, as you can see here, in 1635, of all that occurred with Christianity in the 1500s. In 1517, I believe that's the correct year, Martin Luther broke with the Catholic Church, and thus it was called the Protestant Revolution. The word Protestant comes from protest. So Martin Luther protested some of the teachings of the Catholic Church. And to this day, some of that still occurs. The Roman Catholic Church and all of the different Protestant denominations, as well as the denominations and the religions of the East, and Jerry talked about that with the Russian icons, all of it is Christianity, just different aspects of it. So when we refer to Catholicism or we refer to the Orthodox as in the Protestants, it all comes under the umbrella of Christianity, merely a bit of a different viewpoint of looking at it. So back to this painting. Zurbarán, as I already said, is France or Spain, and he is known as one of the greatest painters of that era. And the religious aspect of it, because it does fall under the Baroque, was what he did. He began with a lot of paintings of the Virgin Mary and then transitioned to some of the saints. Francis lived in the 1300s, and he left a very wealthy family and believed that if he was to live Christianity, he needed to be concerned about the poor. So he started an order of priests and brothers called mendicants, and their perspective was to care about the poor. Later on, an order of Catholic nuns and other nuns also evolved from that same source. Now, I was intrigued by this painting initially because many of us have seen paintings of St. Francis that look different. We see him sitting in a garden. We often see him with birds and more lighthearted. Also, he is the one that they attribute the prayer of peace, and I think I have the beginnings of it here. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon, and so on. And so perhaps the words of that prayer leads us to this particular painting of St. Francis, which is one that, as I already said, it's the Baroque era. And the Baroque era, Zurbarán and other painters of that era had a they looked to the light and the dark side of life. And that's what the colors depict here. If we look at the very left here, and I'll point the arrow, it's very, very dark. And Francis is looking down on that side. There's light coming in this aspect of it. That's done intentionally by Zurbarán. The colors, the different hues of brown also are done intentionally. Part of the Baroque-ness of the painting was to show the splendor of God, but also we humans not quite reaching that in this life. And that's what historians looking at this painting believe St. Francis is pondering here. In his hands, he's holding a skull, and his eyes are looking down toward that skull, perhaps pondering his demise, which is all of our demises. What will become of us and what are we doing in this life to reach an end that will give us the honor and glory of God, which was a theme of Baroque art. Now, when I saw this painting, I initially thought when I was in the Timken, well, here's another saint that has been painted to look otherworldly, and how can we humans living today ever reach that level of holiness? And I was sharing this with an old friend in actually Illinois, and she got back to me and said, you won't believe this, but there was a book being discussed on National Public Radio that came out of the Detroit or the Chicago station, and it's entitled A Living Gospel, Reading God's Story in Holy Lives Today. And it piqued my interest, so I purchased the book, and it was exactly what I think I needed to understand not only this painting, but so many of them that have been done by these artists. In this particular book, in which the author, Robert Ellsberg, looks at sainthood, and in particular, sainthood in our era, he says this, he says, like us, the saints were people of flesh and blood. They were struggling to find their way, not knowing exactly where their path would take them. He goes on to say, the emphasis is not so much on things they said or did, but on how they encountered a depth along the way, or a spirituality, or something bigger than themselves. And it makes it more real for us, I think, when, as we said at the beginning, we're pondering these paintings, we're looking at the techniques, the time, what art period it falls into, but to make it real for us, I think Ellsberg's words ring a bell. Now, with that, if we were in the museum, we go across the rotunda that Jerry had us in before, and we will go now to the Dutch Flemish Museum. And many of you know, this is certainly, if not one of the most famous, but the most famous painting that we have in the Timken. Certainly, it is the most expensive. The painter is the famous Rembrandt, and Rembrandt painted this particular work in his later in life time. He was very prolific, and he was known for really to get inside those people that he decided to paint. This is St. Bartholomew, and many of you know he's one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. He did so much of his work, therefore, in that first century of Christianity. He is depicted here, the word pondering is one we're using. And he's like the saint before him, looking off to the left, not so much downward as just in the distance. One of our other docents recently talked about the same painting, and the docent shared a unique story. The story is because Rembrandt painted Bartholomew later in his life, maybe he was contemplating his own life, because we have here on our left his eye and him looking, pretty alert and perhaps hopeful. But on the right, the eye is in a shadow. It's not fully exposed. Even the part of the face here is less than on the other side. Now, what he could be pondering here is in his hand, he's holding a knife. And if you know the story of St. Bartholomew, sometimes called Nathaniel also, he was skinned to death as he was working, I believe, in Armenia. And he went to that part of the world to spread Christianity. And therefore, he's very, very honored in Orthodox churches. I know I have a friend who's an Armenian Christian, and St. Bartholomew is often the name of their churches, or certainly gets high praise in the Armenian church. And that's because of the works that Bartholomew did. And Rembrandt's interest in him maybe depicts also where Rembrandt ended up in his life. As we already said, he was a very prolific painter, did span so much over his years. As I already mentioned, this was done later. And by late in Rembrandt's life, he did not have the wealth that he had accrued early on. And he was almost penniless, very lonesome, very much pondering perhaps his own demise. And historians have said, perhaps this is why Bartholomew is painted at this time and in this manner. So with that, we are going to turn back to Jerry, who is going to now tell us about something from the other side of that gallery. As I already said, it's Dutch Flemish, but also special. She's chosen a painting that helps us celebrate the season. And Jerry, I'm going to let you tell that. So
Thank you, Barbara.
thank you.
And hello again. As Barbara mentioned, in honor of the season, we're going to step back a couple hundred years to Bruges in the late 15th century. Probably the last quarter of the 1400s. You have here a painting done in oil on an oak panel celebrating the Feast of the Epiphany, or the visit of the three kings to honor the baby Jesus. In actuality, it's my understanding the gospel story does not really mention the number of men, but it does mention three gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. By the beginning of the 14th century, that story has become, in fact, three kings. And by the end of the 15th century, the third king, Balthazar, has become black in honor of Africa. These three men, it is thought, represent many things, one of which is the three known continents at the time. You've got Africa, Asia, and Europe. The other thing they represent are the three ages of man: a young man, Balthazar, a middle-aged man, Melchior, and an older man, Gaspar. These are very interesting. And if you think of the economic times in Flanders at the time, this is Bruges, which is right in the middle of Flanders. One of their highest economic outputs is the production of fabric and intricate weavings and sumptuous robes. If you look at this picture, each king has an entirely different costume, an entirely different crown, a different gift reliquary, and a different scepter. The detail here is very emblematic of Dutch Flemish paintings in the Netherlandish world. The Holy Family is shown before a relatively simple stone building with what appears to be perhaps a thatched roof. However, there is an honorific banner over and behind Mary and the baby Jesus. There are people coming to see the birth in the background. You can see through the hills of what the painter is obviously imagining might be the Palestinian or the desert area. Each king is individually represented with different facial features, facial hair. Balthazar has an interesting mustache. Melchior has a full beard, and Gaspar is, of course, cleanly shaven. If you look at Mary, her gentle view of the kings visiting, and there is a very small strawberry bush in the lower left corner right next to Mary, which has strawberry blooms as well as fruit, which is representational of Mary's virginity and yet as the Mother of God. You can also see kind of a strange man at the far left of the picture that's either peeking around the corner or waiting in line to come through the door. He appears perhaps to be a shepherd. There is some thought that that could be a self-portrait of the artist, but we don't know who the artist is. His name has been lost through time. There was a famous historian that thought perhaps this was done by a gentleman they call the master of the St. Lucy legend. But in the last few years, that attribution has been lessened. In comparing to other paintings of the time, they've decided they're not quite sure who the artist is, but they are very satisfied with the decision that it was painted in Bruges in the late 15th century. It's a beautiful, beautiful representation of the story of the Epiphany, which of course is celebrated on January 7th, typically 6th or 7th. So that is our representation and our tribute to Christmas. And now we're going to move on to something that is a little more emblematic of this evening's celebration, or the Happy New Year, and a little bit of frivolity. Here you have one of the largest canvases in the museum. It's an astounding 7.5, almost 8 feet tall and about 6 feet wide. It's really centers the entire French gallery. It's just amazing. It is now the middle of the 18th century, and Louis XV is in power. His grandfather, Louis XIV, who ruled everything with an iron hand and required the aristocracy to always be gathered around him, is no longer in power. Louis XV is much more relaxed. The society is becoming much more relaxed and frivolous. The paintings are no longer the tight structure of the Baroque period and the heavy colors. You can see that now we're talking about a palette of yellow, blue, and red, and the various permutations of combinations of those colors. This artist is Francois Bouchard. He is a favorite of Madame de Pompadour, who of course is a favorite of the king. And he has also been named the first painter to the king. Mr. Bouchard has an incredibly smooth painting style and can represent fabrics and foliage in a beautiful, rich, and a luxurious way. If you look at the the skirts of the woman sitting on the ground in the forefront. It's amazing. You can almost hear those silks crinkle. Pretty incredible. The young man and young woman are resting. This is a typical event that the aristocrats of the day would do. They would play at being peasants and have intricate costumes made that looked exactly like peasants' clothing, but were made of the finest silks and velvets. And they would go out in very well-tended parks to have picnics and have assignations and enjoy the beautiful day. This particular picture, you can see a very, very wealthy, undoubtedly, young lady, very fragile, very, very white, pale skin in beautiful silks with her boyfriend putting flowers in her hair. But interestingly, his attention seems to have been led astray by perhaps a flower gatherer or a assistant gardener walking by, bearing even more flowers. This is not the full attention to his love that you would think he would be paying, signified by the spaniel at the very foot of the picture, which is emblematic of fidelity. That spaniel perhaps is being led astray by this young man who is interested not only in the woman at his feet, but the woman coming along the path. Now, Francois Boucher was also a painter of opera sets and design, and you can see that in this picture. His backgrounds are beautiful, the greenery, sumptuous, the Amorini above the couple in exactly the same situation as the couple. But there is no path that the young woman walking by is coming down. It's just a piece of ground. This is very much like a sect design. It is a beautiful picture on the front, but perhaps it's not coming from anywhere. Now, this picture is a little bit unusual if you look at the legs of the young woman sitting and the legs of the man sitting. They seem perhaps a little bit out of scale or slightly awry. The reason is that this picture probably would have been installed high on a tall wall above the wainscoting in a salon in France at the time. Huge picture. It would have dominated the room, but it would have created a feeling throughout the room of lightheartedness and frivolity, joy, and engagement. This is very typical of what we call the Rococo period, where pastel paintings and curlicues and circles, scallops, and shells were the design items of the day. So this salon would have been a perfect place to have our New Year's Eve toast of champagne, and it would have been the perfect time in history, the mid-1700s, with Francois Boucher. Now we're going to move back to Barbara, who's going to continue this journey through Rococo.
Thanks so much, Jerry. Can you hear me all right, everyone? Yep. Okay, great. As Jerry mentioned, we embarked on the Rococo period as we transitioned away from the Baroque. And I love Jerry's saying perhaps the whimsicalness of the previous painting by Boucher would remind us of the time we're in right now, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. Well, I look at this, and when she said that, I thought, well, this could be tomorrow afternoon, New Year's Day afternoon, when people celebrated the night before and they still got together with their friends. Now, before I speak about the specificity of this painting, I'd like to bring your attention to its artist. His name was Jean-Honoré Fragonard. And for those of you who speak French, I apologize if I wasn't quite right. But Fragonard was a student of the previous painter to whom Jerry spoke, and that was Boucher. Boucher was very popular, very well known. Fragonard learned much from him as he was a disciple of his. But Fragonard also branched out and went to Italy where he traveled from his home in France. And he went a couple of times that they were able to see in history, the historians. And this was later on, he went a second time, and they felt that when he returned, he had matured as a painter from what he learned from Boucher, but also from what he learned from famous artists in Italy. And as Jerry said, this is all part of the whimsical Rococo period. Now, this painting is called Blind Man's Buff. And it was recently pointed out to me that I had been saying Blind Man's Bluff because that was a game many of us played in our youth. So I decided to research it. And I thought, what is the difference? Well, it turns out that this word buff versus bluff is actually used interchangeably because the definition of buff as we know it is what we might call, especially a guy who's loves to work out, or we might be polishing silver or our shoes and somebody might say, did you buff that enough with your cloth? So buff, certainly in this era, was just another spelling for bluff. And actually, Fragonard has two paintings with this title. The other one has the L, this one does not. So that kind of solves the mystery of this particular word. Now, that obviously refers to a game. So here we have part of the aristocracy of France spending perhaps a Sunday afternoon or a New Year's Day afternoon in the park. Historians are almost 100% sure that this was cut off from a larger painting because all of these characters in the painting are looking to our left and their right at something that we cannot see. Regardless of that, we do see a lot. And the main focus that accompanies the title is this young man who is being blindfolded by the lady behind him. And the idea of the storyline is that it was something very commonly done in that era, whimsically, perhaps, as I've said before. So he's blindfolded, he then gets up, he's twirled around, kind of what we even did as kids, but his goal is to find one of these ladies that he must touch or grab, and that becomes his companion for the day. So that's the idea of this story. The artwork, and Jerry referred to it, it's light, pastel colors. The lines are not definitive. They're more almost impressionistic, which did not come until about 100 years later. And the clouds, this figure in the clouds almost depicts what is going on here with the people, the live people. Now, I want to lastly bring your attention to this tree. This tree is a focal point also to this painting in the upper right-hand corner, beautifully done. You can see the branches coming out from the main part and then the foliage. This led to something that was done in the summer of 2019. The Timken Museum in the summer of 2018 began a program to invite local artists to depict something in the foyer or the rotunda that would be a sculptor-like artistic display that would accompany one of the Timken's pictures. And in this case, the art picture is the one I just spoke of. I love this particular photo that Allison helped find for us because not only does it show what was done in the summer of 2019 that I'll speak of, but it goes into the French gallery here. And here's the painting that Jerry spoke of, The Lovers in the Park. And here's my small one that I just spoke of. From our slides, you can't see that. Jerry referred to her size, I did not, but you can see here, it's much smaller than the other one. Now, the artist was Roman Di Salvo, and we docents were so lucky to have him come as a guest speaker before the museum closed. And he basically explained what he did. This is like a large erector set. And yes, I pointed out the tree because that was his focal point here. And then he created this almost park-like setting. These are actually benches that we could sit upon and ponder not only his erector set, but what is in our museum. I had a chance to do that, and it was just such a wonderful experience because it was quiet. You almost felt like you were in an above the world kind of experience. And Di Salvo just did an awesome job, I believe, in depicting this. We obviously did not continue the program in 2020 because of the pandemic, and we haven't heard yet, but I'm sure because it's been such a popular program, the 2 years they did have it, that it will continue when it opens. Now, I'm looking at the time and we're running short, but we do want to end with saying a few things about the American Gallery. The American Gallery is our last gallery that we haven't visited. And that gallery shows artwork that obviously began after the Revolutionary War. And the year here that Jerry's going to speak of is 1841. The artwork after the Revolutionary War started with portraits and then evolved to landscapes and marine life. Jerry and I both chose marine life, and that's how we're going to end. So Jerry, we're a little bit out of time, but maybe we can both summarize our paintings.
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, I'll move quickly because we have run out of time just about. This is a painting by Thomas Birch in 1841. Mr. Birch became known as the father and the founder of American marine painting. He started as an engraver. That detail work you can see emblematic in this painting with the way he treated the sea, the waves splashing against the ship. This is an American packet ship, which was like a mailman of today, moving up and down the coast, delivering mail, packages, and passengers. This ship has obviously been caught in a terrific storm. There is a dinghy being rowed out from shore trying to rescue the sailors. The sailors are frantically dropping a lifeboat at the rear of the ship. One of the masts has fallen over. The middle mast has broken off at the top. There are two ships on the left trying to reach this ship before it founders, a paddle wheeler and a small sailing ship. I believe the lighthouse shown at the end of the cliffs that the ship is trying to avoid signifies hope. Will they live? Will they make it through this storm? This is a wonderful picture. It's a large picture. It's about 5 feet by 3.5, I believe. And I encourage you to go to the American Gallery when you're in the museum next, hopefully mid-year at the very latest, and see the detail and the power and the ocean in this picture that just explodes out of the picture. I really believe that you can hear the wind and smell the sea when you're standing in front of it. Barbara?
Thank you. My marine life story or marine scene is more serene. Jerry's was obviously the storm. Both of our painters, Birch and Lane, were, Lane was a lithographer before he became a painter, and Birch was
An engraver.
engraver.
Mhm.
Both of those occupations depict attention to detail. And Jerry talked about the attention to detail in hers. And in my painting by Fitz H. Lane, we have the same thing. The detail, not only of the ships here in the foreground, but also the ships in the back and the town of Castine. It's called Castine Harbor and Town, and that's in Maine. 3/4 of this picture is this beautiful, beautiful sky at sunset. And the way he really juxtapositions the fading sun with the growing nighttime scene, and then the fading here of the brightness of the day helps the serenity and the mood of this particular painting. So as we said, the American Gallery has the years approximately after the Civil War until around 1900. So when you do have a chance to come, you'll see not only our two marine paintings, but many others. In conclusion, the same gentleman from the same book, David Perkins, concludes, if most discipline dig moats, art builds bridges. In conclusion, Jerry and I would like to say, may 2021 help us build bridges that are very positive for all of us. So thank you so very much. And with that, it's back to Allison.
Thank you so much. Great job, ladies, for our last tour of the year. And yeah, it was a great overview. We got to see a couple pieces that I think we haven't talked about in tours before. So that was really great. We didn't get any questions in the chat, but if anyone has a question now that they'd like to ask either of our docents, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask that question now. You know, sometimes it takes a minute to think. Okay, well, I wanted to ask you ladies, because you're both newer docents with us, and I was just curious, you know, if you had a highlight of 2020 from starting your journey with the Timken. I think you both graduated this year, right?
We
Yeah, so
did.
can you talk a little bit about maybe what that was like, what that process was like, since it was a little different.
Oh, Jerry, you go first.
Okay. For me, I'm someone that came from the business world and really had no background in art whatsoever. So to have the benefit of going through basically what is almost in this year, a 2-year study of the Timken collection and the history that goes along with it and the meaning behind the art was absolutely fascinating. I really actually acquired a much more strong appreciation for history while I studied the art, and learning of the trials and travails of the artist, and the development of art from tempera to oils and how they transported those items and what the colors are made of. This is all absolutely a fascinating trip. Christina and all the docents were so good at explaining each of the pictures and each of the periods in art. And the group of docents was really wonderful to meet a whole raft of new friends and learn new things. It was really turned out to be a positive aspect of this pandemic year. So I'm very, very grateful and looking forward to a continuing relationship.
Thank you, Jerry. I will concur with a lot of Jerry's remarks. I come from the education world, and one quote that was, or maybe I should say phrase that was so pertinent in education, say the last 10 years or so, was lifelong learning. And I knew when I transitioned from teaching and administering in education, I wanted to continue that for myself. And I have always loved art. And what I like about being a docent is that some of it wasn't new. We all come from different backgrounds, and some of the docents, the newer docents, knew way more about art than I did, but were more hesitant to present. I had presented, so I wasn't nervous so much about that, but I was about learning about the art. So I truly am putting that phrase, lifelong learning, into practice, because we never end. And maybe we'll learn more in 2021 with our new year about to embark in a few hours. So with that, Allison, back to you.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Those were beautiful reflections on your time. And I know that it was a bit troubling at first, probably to hear that you were switching to online classes for your docent training, but I think you guys handled it so well and clearly learned so much. And I kind of feel like I was in the same boat because I graduated with my master's in art history this year. And I came from,
Congratulations.
oh, thank you. Yes. And I came from I studied Roman art, so ancient art in my master's program. And so it's been great coming to the Timken and kind of learning more. I'd taken classes in all of these kind of later works, but I've learned so much being here in just these short months that I've been here. So excited to, keep that learning going, as you were saying, Barbara. Well, with that, thank you all so much for joining us. We hope that you've enjoyed these tours. And like I said, we continue them in the new year. So next Thursday, we'll see you here at 11 a.m. for another tour. And we hope you all have a happy and healthy and safe new year. So thank you very much.
New year.
Thank you.